Hey there, good morning everyone. Welcome to Bold TV. I'm Carrie Sheffield, here with Clay's lovely replacement for this week. All you Claymates, stick around. Clay is in North Carolina vegging out because it was his birthday yesterday. He's allowed to do that.
Yeah, he deserves a break.
But Alicé, who I'm excited to introduce you guys to, she is, you will love her, especially the Claymates who are liberal. She works for a website called Being Liberal, and she hosts a TV show called No BS. That's No with a K. So Alicé, welcome.
Good morning, Carrie. Thank you so much for having me. And we have a really, really exciting show today, and it's an honor. It's my first time. I've known Carrie for a while. I always tell her that we probably disagree on literally every issue, but we somehow still manage to get along. So, yeah, it's really wonderful to be here.
You're perfect for Bold, because that's what this is all about, saying that we can be totally polar opposites, but we can still love each other.
Yeah, and we do. And, you know, my liberal friends, a lot of them can't do that, so I'm glad that we could find that common ground.
Yes, and common ground. We know you guys have common ground. We want to hear your comments, questions. We will feed them to our guests. We have a great lineup. We've got Congressman Espaillat on from Harlem, and he's introduced articles of impeachment for President Trump. Yeah, I want to talk to him about that. And who else do we have, Alicé?
So we're also going to have John Fugelsang. He is a comedian, and he's host of Page 6 TV. He's very funny. We're really, really excited to talk to him as well.
Yeah. So please put your comments. We have some great, smart viewers who are a lot smarter than us sometimes and have much better, okay, all the time. And always have insightful things to say to our guests. So please, please keep them coming and talk to each other. I like seeing the conversations on Facebook and Periscope when our viewers are talking with each other. So breaking news this morning, if you guys are watching at 10:30, I believe, so in the middle of the show, we'll try to give you some updates. Michael Flynn is going to be entering a plea agreement. So this means he's not, this is not an indictment. This is just the next step in seeing what's going to happen. What's your take on this?
It's interesting because I came in and we had a whole lineup for the show and we talked about what we were going to talk about, and then suddenly all of that changed because this is what happens with the news, especially now in Washington. So I spoke with one of the guests that are going to be coming on, and he kind of said what I believe, which is this news because everybody was already expecting it? Flynn is very much someone that there wasn't much speculation about whether or not he was going to be indicted or even charged in any way. So I don't think it's particularly that groundbreaking or breaking news, but I think liberals are going to hatch on to this and proceed on to the Russian investigations, and it'll be generating conversation for a while.
See, Alicé, now that was an honest assessment, as in sometimes a spade's a spade, a mug's a mug, a plea's a plea. Yeah. Like, let's just leave it there and not, like, have these, I call it 50 Shades of impeachment fantasies around things. Like, you have to just read it for what it is. So I think we can both agree on that.
I think we can agree on that. Yeah, I'm one of those liberals, I guess, that I think the Russian investigation is very important. I think it should continue to be investigated, but I also don't think it is the only thing we should be talking about. And I do think there has been a lot of speculation rather than actual concrete evidence as to what is going on between the Trump administration potentially and Russia.
See, this is why we're friends. She's
obviously
an honest liberal.
Yeah, I am an honest liberal. That is the thing.
And we have some great honest liberals in our audience too. So please join our conversation here. We're going to welcome our first guest, Alexandra DeSanctis. She's a friend of the show. She's from the National Review Institute, and Jenny Hollander, first time here at Bold. She's the senior editor of Bustle. Welcome to you both, ladies.
Thank you. Great to be here. Happy to be here.
So we're going to talk about what's happening with just this cascade, this waterfall of shocking sexual harassers who are collapsing now under the weight of this #MeToo campaign. People we would have never suspected coming out and being outed as sexual harassers, and their careers are ending. Jenny, do you think this is just the beginning, or is this going to be the end?
That's a great question, Carrie. I think it is absolutely the beginning. What I fear is a backlash against the women that are very bravely speaking up. But I do hope it is the beginning. We know that one in 5 women will be raped across the course of their lifetime. We know that every 98 seconds a woman in America is sexually harassed or assaulted. I think it's time that these women are able to step forward and these men and women can face repercussions.
And as you may know, Nancy Pelosi, she called for Rep. Conyers to step down, and that generated a lot of backlash. And now she recently called for him to resign. Was she a hypocrite? And is there a double standard when it's someone that we personally know? Like we recently saw with Lena Dunham, who again, obviously not very surprising considering it's Lena Dunham, got a significant amount of backlash for defending the girls' writer that was accused of rape.
And we have a tweet from you, Alexandra. Let's put that up on screen. Looking at, I think I agree with you in this tweet that you made. Let's pull that up on screen. As far as Nancy Pelosi, it's great, but this took way too long, and I highly doubt her sincerity. So tell us more about that.
I actually have a piece in National Review today, if I could just push that writing about this, talking about the hypocrisy of the left. And it's obviously present on the right, too, but I think we've been hearing from these people forever about the war on women and women's rights and protecting women, and then suddenly people in their own ranks on the left are accused of these things, very credibly accused of these terrible types of assaults, and everybody goes silent, and they're called an icon, and everyone says, Pelosi goes on Meet the Press and says, well, John Conyers is a huge proponent of women's rights, and he supported the Violence Against Women Act. Okay, well, fine, but if he was assaulting women, you've been telling me that's a huge problem, and I agree it's a huge problem, so let's do something about it. And yeah, it's great. I mean, I'm happy that she has now called on him to resign. That was the right thing to do, but she should have done that as soon as credible allegations came out, and it's very difficult to take her seriously now, I think.
Well, and what was your take on when she gave that interview on Sunday where she said, oh, well, we don't know who the accuser is. We don't know anything about her, but he has a long career. I mean, why did it take her so long to believe, or at least listen to the women and elevate?
Yes. Well, I think the one thing she said later is that she had the time to kind of sit down and read the accuser's story and take the time to really consider it for herself. And that was, I think when she made the decision to call on him to resign. But I agree with Alexandra. I think she should have, right away, come forward and ask for him to resign as soon as these came out.
Well, and I think Congressman Conyers' lawyer has shot back and said, it's the people who elected him, it's not Nancy Pelosi that elected him. And also he questioned the disparity of Democrats not calling on Al Franken to resign, but calling for Conyers to resign. Do you think there's some hypocrisy? And I think the implication was for him was that this might be a racial issue. Do you think that's overblown?
That's a great question. I think that certainly with Franken, I will certainly say that I have definitely heard Democrats, and I know of Democrats who have called on him to resign. And Franken himself has welcomed an investigation. And that's kind of all we can hope for, an investigation into the crimes that these men are accused of committing.
I don't know, for me, I mean, I haven't heard a single Democratic senator call on Franken to resign, and I think that would be huge coming from somebody, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand yesterday was asked if he should step down, and she said, well, it's his decision. And it's not. If you believe the war on women is real, it can't be his decision. If he really did these things, then I think any sincere Democrat has to call on him to resign.
But I think certainly that if we're talking about holding everyone accountable, we always come back to what about the highest office in the land? What about holding Trump accountable for the 13 plus women that he is accused of harassing? I think it comes back to what kind of example are we setting if we're not holding him accountable?
Could I play devil's advocate here for a second?
By all means.
Okay, so is every allegation of sexual harassment or sexual assault, should that be treated equally, right? Because, I mean, with Al Franken, yes, we've seen pictures and we've also seen a woman come forward saying, he grabbed my butt 25 years ago. And is there a statute of limitations for a lot of these things, even with media mogul Russell Simmons? A lot of the allegations about him are coming up from 1990, 1991. And I would even add, to what extent is this creating a witch hunt-like environment?
I think that's a great question. There's obviously a huge spectrum of different issues that we've seen in all these allegations. There's a huge difference between some of these things that are being alleged, and we have to preserve those distinctions, I think, if we're going to have an honest conversation about this. But at the same time, I don't think anyone should call for Franken to go to jail. I don't know that he necessarily even committed any sex crimes, and that's obviously an important thing to say, but calling on him to step down is very different from saying he should rot in jail for the rest of his life. And I think public figures have to be held to a high standard, and I completely agree. The same should be said of Donald Trump, of Roy Moore, of anybody on the right as well.
Well, and to that point, I know Kennedy, the host on Fox Business, she was saying how you see these people in the media in Hollywood who are getting fired because that's the private sector saying, like, we're going to make these judgments and these decisions very rapidly, whereas in the public sector, this is a problem because the accountability is from the voters. And at the end of the day, if the person isn't going to take it upon themselves to resign, it's the voters who have to make that choice. And it looks like in the case of Roy Moore, the voters themselves might be putting him to office. And so, what about that discrepancy, Jenny? Is there a way to reconcile this?
I certainly do think that it is. It does feel unjust that so many men in so many spheres and different demographics, in comedy, in Hollywood, have come down, have been fired, have been taken off their pedestals. And in politics, that just hasn't been the case. Hasn't been the case with President Trump, hasn't been the case with Roy Moore. And I think that whenever these accusations are made, they should be taken incredibly seriously. And an investigation should be launched into all these crimes, and they should be treated equally in that way.
I was going to say something again. This is what I think not enough people talk about with the Me Too movement. Of course, I'm a huge supporter of it. I have things that I find could potentially be very dangerous. And one of that is the possibility that somebody who's innocent gets caught up in this. And it's become, I think what's great about America is that we have due process, right? And a lot of things have become trial by Twitter and trial by media. So is there a way to find a balance between actually launching the investigations that you're talking about or immediately condemning somebody without even, giving the person the right to have that process be carried out?
I think that's a wonderful point. I'm really glad that you raised that because I really am hesitant to condemn all men who are accused immediately because in a lot of cases, who knows? And I think we've seen this on college campuses with these sort of kangaroo courts that are set up. Oftentimes, men who are innocent or very complicated situations are just painted with a very broad brush, and it's very black and white. But at the same time, we're clearly in a moment where a lot of women finally feel like they have the cultural power to speak up, and we shouldn't rush to condemn those women or to try and discredit their stories simply because it's our political allies who are the ones being accused of something. And I think that's what's most troubling to me in terms of Al Franken or John Conyers or Roy Moore is just the quick, the effort to discredit people who are accusing our friends.
I agree with you entirely. I mean, sexual assault is not a partisan issue. It affects, as we talked about, every sphere, every demographic, and we cannot ever consider it a partisan issue. Anyone who kind of says, as you talked about Lena Dunham earlier, well, that's my friend, I don't think he could have done that, and therefore someone is lying, I completely disagree with that.
I agree.
Well, and what about the men? So you see what Charlie Rose said, and I think some of the other men, and certainly Weinstein said, well, this was consensual. I'm just a baller. Like, women like me. Like, that's what this really is. So how do we let men know that if you're in a position of power and it's women who are in the hierarchy below you, it's not okay. It doesn't mean that they like you. It just means they're probably afraid of you. How would we create a culture of that? And Jenny, I'm gonna play the cranky conservative at the panel and say, I feel like the 1960s in America, we allowed this loosening of our cultural mores where we said, free love this and who cares, blah, 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 old fashioned, did the 60s cultural revolution allow for some of this to be more accepted?
I don't know about the 60s. I do know at this point of time, what I am sure of is that we can always trust women. Women know when they're being harassed. Women know when they're being taken advantage of. Women know when someone in power is making them feel uncomfortable. So I would say that my gut reaction is always to believe women in that way. When a woman comes forward and says, look, perhaps he says it was consensual and there is a grey area here, but he was in power and I felt that I couldn't say no. I think we just have to listen to her there and say, okay, well, where is the due process here?
Carrie, I love that you just made that comment because I've been harping on about this forever, and I'm not going to speak specifically to the 60s, but I think there definitely has been a cultural shift in the United States over the last few decades, and of course sexual assault happened before the last couple decades, but I think there is a huge shift in the way we look at women and the way we don't even talk about human dignity anymore. I think that's a huge component missing from this debate.
Great. Thank you so much, ladies. Thank you for being here, Alexandra and Jenny, and we are very grateful for this discussion. I think we talked about a number of things that the media hasn't brought up so far, so thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Great to be here. Thanks.
So let's move on to our next segment, brought to you by change.org.
And Change.org is the world's largest petition platform and hub for civic organizing. Its mission is to empower individuals everywhere to create the change they want to see in the world. And to be clear, Change.org is not the organizer of the Trump impeachment petition. Change is an open platform, and it's nonpartisan, bipartisan for civic organizing. Tom Steyer, who began the petition on Change.org, is pushing for the impeachment. His petition will help to guide the conversation here today.
And with that being said, let's welcome our guest on Skype, Adriano Espaillat, Congressman for New York State's 13th District. Welcome, Congressman.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Great to have you back, Congressman. We're glad that you're here on Bold. And I don't know if you remember, but I got to moderate the Silicon Harlem debate that you were on.
Yes.
So good to see you again.
Seemed 20 years ago.
I know. So much had happened. We were so young and naive then. So you and a few other House Democrats introduced some articles of impeachment. And I got to say, I didn't vote for Trump, but I'm an independent conservative. And by my mind, it seems that this is a little extreme. And, you know, what about the 2016 election? Was this a wake-up call to listen to the voters and maybe do something different?
Well, I think that we in Congress have a responsibility. We should not abdicate our responsibilities to look into matters that are before us that are troubling. And this particular matter, the 5 articles of impeachment that we presented, I think are very substantive. They're not knee-jerk reactions or off-the-cuff reactions from us, maybe opportunistic for the time. We have a responsibility as duly elected members of Congress to see that if the President of the United States has potentially violated the law, that we could look into this and begin come in and let us know whether, in fact, he violated these 5 articles of impeachment that we put forward. And so this is serious. This is has nothing to do with the current Mueller investigation. And as you saw today, something broke today where General Flynn was arrested. A person that was a high-ranking Trump member of the Trump administration just 9 months ago was cuffed and arrested today. And so this is very serious, and we should not dilute this or second guess this or sweep it under the rug. We should look into the realities as to whether or not the president obstructed justice when he asked.
Well, I think it's important to note that the charges that have been brought and looking at Paul Manafort as well, those were unrelated to the campaign. Those were issues related to their own private corruption. And General Flynn had previously been a member of the Obama administration, so certainly a lot of his extracurricular activities that were outside the scope of his government service, those seemed to be separate from anything that the Trump campaign was doing.
Well, he was arrested on grounds that he lied to the FBI with regards to his meetings with Russian officials. And we are concerned that the president overstepped his boundaries when he first asked high-ranking members of his administration to leave the Oval Office, and then proceeded to ask the former head of the FBI not to investigate or to General Flynn. And so this is egregious. This is like a local mayor perhaps asking the police commissioner of the town and other high-ranking members of his administration to leave the office and then ask a precinct commander not to investigate a potential criminal act of any individual. The president should not be above the law. None of us should be above the law. And I think there's grounds for these 5 articles of impeachments to be presented, including the 2 regarding the emoluments clause of the Constitution and the other 2 as well.
Congressman, your impeachment articles are being called, and I quote, a long shot effort that stands little chance in the Republican-led House. Do you think this is going to pass? Is this a symbolic initiative for you? If no, why are you still doing it? Who supports your efforts?
Well, this articles of impeachment are not Democrat or Republican. I think that they are American, and that we have a system of government that has strong, independent institutions that must be safeguarded and protected. And I think these 5 articles of impeachment present 5 instances where we feel, 6 of us feel, that originally that the president violated the law. Now, there are other members of Congress. I think there's potentially about 15 members of Congress that are gravitating around the possibility of supporting it. And this is something that is not, this is something that is not wild and crazy. A great number of Americans are supportive of the impeachment process. In fact, millions of them are supportive of the impeachment process. There is a petition that you alluded to at the beginning of this program that has been signed by several million Americans. And so this is substantive. Many people in the district that I represent stop me on the street and tell me, when are you going to begin impeachment proceedings? And so we've done just that.
But Congressman, do you think that because it is a Republican-held Congress, that this is sort of, something that, I mean, the tax plan just passed the House, and then it looks like the Senate is probably going to pass the tax plan. Like, these are the policy issues that the election were fought about. Do you think that by doing the articles of impeachment, you might be distracting from the substance and the policy?
Oh, believe me, this administration is not short of distractions. They come in the form of tweets. They come in the forms of allegations against you guys of fake news. They come in a variety of ways. And just as we are discussing the tax scam that's being proposed, we see that a high member of the Trump administration just 9 months ago gets cuffed and arrested. And so our emphasis, our views as Americans, and our focus as Americans, and we as legislators on these substantive matters that were debated during the campaign are pushed to the side in many ways when these kinds of crises emerge. So this administration is not short, and this is not a way to distract the American people. The American people, many of them, in fact, as I said earlier, several million of them have asked for impeachment proceedings already.
And I want to shift the conversation a little bit to the recent sexual assault allegations against Rep. Conyers. Do you, first, Nancy Pelosi had defended him. Now she's calling on him to resign. He says that this is something the American people should demand and should be in charge of, not Nancy Pelosi. How do you feel? Do you feel he should resign?
These are very serious charges brought up against my colleague, Mr. Conyers. And I feel that I'm not privy to the information that perhaps the party leader, our leader, Nancy Pelosi, or others have been privy to. So I can't take a definitive stand on whether or not he should resign. But if the charges are as serious as they seem to be, he certainly should be considering that.
And would you support there's legislation pending that would ban the use of basically slush funds, how do you say that word? Hush funds, to cover up these sexual allegations and these settlements? I mean, it seems that should be a bipartisan issue. Would you support banning those sort of fundings?
Absolutely, no question about it. Each member of Congress should be personally liable for their action.
Sure. And Congressman, I know you're Dominican American, and you've been following very closely what's happened in the Caribbean with the hurricanes. And I know Change.org has been following this as well with petitions, and we don't want to forget what's happening and the people down there. What can we do to help the people of Puerto Rico?
Well, Puerto Rico is still in pain. Almost 3 months after the hurricane, we see how allegedly 50% of the population, it could be even higher, still have no energy. Now, energy is critical because the water system runs with pumps that is generated by energy. Energy provides the ability for businesses to continue to move forward. Energy allows hospitals to stay open and schools to reopen. Energy is so critical to Puerto Rico, and the infrastructure was so fragile. And let me remind you that this also occurred right in the middle of a fiscal crisis, unprecedented fiscal crisis for the island of Puerto Rico. So we must help out. That requires capital dollars. There's just no way around this. It must require a deep investment in the infrastructure of Puerto Rico, first and foremost with the system of energy, the energy grid. And then, of course, roads and bridges that were destroyed, schools, and houses, homes that were destroyed. This is all so critical. There's a projected 1 million people will leave Puerto Rico within the next year or two. And so Puerto Rico currently has 3.5 million people.
Sure. And so, Congressman, what can we do? Any viewers who are watching this program, how can we help?
People should continue to donate. People should continue to help out individually. I think
What's
that
the best place to donate? I know there are some problems with.
there are not-for-profits that are very credible in New York, in Illinois, in Florida, in areas where you have a great concentration of the Puerto Rican diaspora that you should be looking up and donating to. Now, however, let me also say that we have a responsibility in Congress because these are American citizens. And so the governor of Puerto Rico came here recently and said that it would take $90 billion to rebuild Puerto Rico. So we should begin to make the payments towards that reconstruction, and not in the form of a loan, as we did with the first $5 billion that were allocated in the process here.
Sure.
Right.
One, certainly in Texas, that the relief there has not been in the form of a loan. It's been direct aid. So.
Correct.
Great. Thank you, Congressman Espaillat, for being with us.
Thank you for having me here. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Take care. So next, we are going to welcome back a new panel. Rob Smith, back to the show. He's a journalist and friend of the show, and he's an author. And Kevin McCullough, he's a syndicated talk show host and author. We're going to talk about the story this week on Project Veritas, about what happened. So if you hadn't been following this week, a woman lied to the Washington Post. She said that Roy Moore got her pregnant as a teenager. And it seems that she did this in order to embarrass them and prove liberal bias at the Washington Post. So let's bring in our panel. Kevin, what do you think she was hoping to gain from this?
I think, like most of Project Veritas's projects, they were trying to poke the underbelly of the media organization and see if the operation on this particular line of stories was legitimate, and they found out what they were looking for. That the Post has done fairly good, credible reporting on this.
I beg to differ, actually. I think that what they were trying to do was they were trying to discredit journalists. They were trying to bring something that was false to the Washington Post so that they would take the bait and Project Veritas could say, hey, look what's going on. They took this bait. This woman was lying. And what about all these other women? They're probably lying as well. So I don't think that the intentions
We just
are
basically just said the same thing. The idea being that Project Veritas makes it its business to try to find false reporting. And one of the ways they do that is rope-a-dope strategies that go in and present narratives, and they want to see how thoroughly that media organization does or does not respond to it. And this time, the Post sniffed it out, responded, and the story essentially died for Project Veritas.
But what I question is, what's the point of trying to expose bad journalism? And I also question it because we all know now that they are being funded by some conservatives, right? The news just broke that there was a conservative, I forget his name, but he had donated $25,000 to this organization. So it's becoming a partisan thing where you have conservative people that are trying to discredit the work of journalists in order to say, hey, this is false.
I know it's somewhat surprising, but most conservatives in America don't think that the majority of mainstream reporting is actually unbiased.
Doesn't surprise me.
I know it's a big shock to hear that conservatives would have funded an organization that's trying to prove integrity in the journalism process. But Project Veritas only exists because the mainstream press went the way it did over the last 30 years. If they had remained as objective as they could, you would not have seen an organization like Project Veritas, and there's a couple of others that are out there that do the same thing. You wouldn't see them popping up because people would have greater confidence in what they're seeing on the front page of the New York Times and the Washington Post.
But
I'd be curious, do
Evan,
either of you?
here's what I'm a little bit confused with what you said.
Okay.
I think a lot of the discussion now has been, when is it okay for journalists to lie? When is it okay for people to use these tactics that are a little bit questionable? But my question to you is, Project Veritas, I feel like a lot of journalists are engaging in revisionist history. They're forgetting about what happened with Project Veritas and Acorn, right? They're known for having a number of doctored tapes. They have a very specific narrative. They're not necessarily about rooting out corruption. They're going in with a very specific goal, regardless of whether what they find is actually aligned with what they're trying to expose. They brought down an organization that works with poor communities, doing voter outreach based on totally false and doctored videos.
That is completely untrue. The Acorn investigation demonstrated fraud in multiple districts of Chicago. I was doing talk radio in Chicago. I covered that story. The Acorn organization had multiple inconsistencies with its operation, and Project Veritas helped shine a light on that. It wouldn't have brought them down if there hadn't been some sort of problem with the organization. James O'Keefe is not that powerful, but telling the truth is. And I will take issue with you on whether or not those tapes are doctored. There's a difference in editing out some breaths and some other things and changing the narrative of what is told over the course of a video. You can't point to a Project Veritas video where the narrative has substantively changed from what they have reported and what was actually recorded on the longer tape.
Well, I think it's important to note also that James O'Keefe did spend time in jail for his methods, which were illegal.
He's gotten in trouble a couple of times.
Got in trouble.
And the thing is, I think, David, you and I are on the same page here. I'm sorry, Kevin. You and I are on the same page. My brother founded Newsbusters. If you don't know about Newsbusters, it's started by the Media Research Center, which gets millions of dollars from conservative donors. They've been around for a long time. The founder, Brent Bozell, identified this problem of media bias. And as anybody who watches Bold knows, I'm obsessed with media bias. President Trump retweeted me this year when I was on Fox and Friends talking about media bias and calling it out. So I totally agree that the mainstream media has, when I say the problem of the fake news problem, I think a lot of it has to do with their very narrow version of the truth, but truth is a very big thing. So even if the mainstream media is saying something that's true, sometimes they forget so much more of the context of what they're reporting, and that's what makes people upset, I think. So, but I want to ask you though, Rob, because you're LGBT, you're African American,
Yeah.
and you talk about problems in the press and how you don't feel like you're represented. As a conservative, can you identify with people like me feeling like we're not being served by the mainstream press?
You know what? I can identify with conservatives not feeling like they're represented. I can identify with liberals not feeling like they're represented. What people need to realize is that the problems that people have with media, and every single person on this panel is a member of the media, is that they think that a lot of people come from very privileged backgrounds, right? And a lot of people come into this industry as journalists, as people in the media, and they think that it is our job to educate the unwashed masses, to guide them in the right direction. That is not our job as media. That is not our job as journalists, but it is very obvious that people think that way because when you look at some of the backgrounds of the people who rise into positions of power within the media, these people come from very privileged, very sort of myopic backgrounds. And that's the biggest problem that we have with media bias right now. I will say, agree with both of you a little bit, and I will say that, yes, Project Veritas has done some bad things that are not honest. And I will agree with you when you're saying that they are trying to expose media bias. But I do not agree that they are some independent organization that's free of any kind of media bias.
They've never pretended to be independent. James O'Keefe, longtime conservative activist before he started the organization. He's trained other activist organizations to do the same thing. Lila Rose and her work with the Planned Parenthood clinics, which has really exposed the kind of underbelly of how they operate. They don't report 90% of the statutory rapes that come into their clinics. We wouldn't know that except that Lila Rose sent undercover people into clinics to get them to admit that on tape. That serves us a purpose. That serves the public a purpose for us to know the actual story. James O'Keefe broke into a congresswoman's office, and he spent a little time in the pokey for that. He's done a couple of other things. He's paid the consequential price for that. His unwillingness to accept anything other than what the facts are and to go find them is something that our mainstream press used to do. We don't seem to do that anymore. And
That's not true. That is not true. That's not true.
Well,
I don't believe that the mainstream. I'm sorry.
I actually, this is where I partly agree with you.
Breaking news.
Yeah,
Right.
no, I mean, this is when we talk about honest
Yes.
liberals, I'm with you on this. Because I think when we talk about fake news, right, the reason why so many people believe, in my opinion, that fake news is so prevalent isn't necessarily because Donald Trump is tweeting it. It's because of the necessity of credibility that is just not there with the media, right? And, I mean, you can give an example of the claim that Donald Trump said, thousands of people voted illegally, right? Or there was voter fraud, which was not...
You said millions.
Yes, millions. Thank you. 3 million. Where did that... Nobody talks about this. Where did that allegation come from? It came from the Washington Post.
Right.
And it was uninvestigated. So if you had a media that actually was reporting credibly on a number of these issues rather than engaging in sensationalist BS, then maybe it wouldn't be so easy for people to latch on thinking that everything is fake news. What do you think?
Well, I disagree because I do, because a lot of people are always talking about the mainstream press and the media. What people don't understand, and this is what irritates me about everything right now, is that in this social media driven culture that we're in, we are all the media, right? So we give too much power to the quote unquote mainstream press, to the CNNs, the MSNBCs, the Fox Newses of the world. Now, to everybody at this table, that is those are very important outlets. They're very important outlets to the country. We have to realize the people don't care. I was on Instagram. Taraji P. Henson, wonderful actress on Instagram, has millions of followers. She tweeted about the slavery situation that's going on in Libya. And she says, well, you know, when is the media going to get on this? And I'm like pulling my hair out saying, Taraji, you have 6 million followers on Instagram. You are the media. You can reach these people before Fox News, MSNBC, CNN can. And that's what we're missing in this conversation about what is or isn't the mainstream
I don't think
press.
we're missing it. I think that there's truth to that. My radio show is liberating 50 slaves from the Sudan as a Christmas project that we're doing into the holidays, and we've liberated 48 so far. So I'm proud of that. But the idea that those big networks are not going to exist and kind of function the way they are as kind of elitist to the everyday person, to your point, is really true. Even look at the Matt Lauer story. You got 2 different versions coming out of NBC headquarters within the last 24 hours. We had no idea that he was doing any of this. And then there's a videotape from the Today Show archive of him saying, hey, nice sweater, keep bending over. The view's good from here. Like, you can't convince me that there weren't management people that didn't know that there was some degree of behavior that was problematic. But to cover their legal exposure, they're making a story say one thing when the truth something else. And that's what the American people want. They don't want necessarily to be told you have to agree with leftists or right or people from the right. They want to know what the facts are. And the American people are smart enough to make up their own opinion if they are actually informed of what is.
And I don't believe that these outlets are not giving us the facts. I believe that people need to be more cognizant of what they are taking in, and they need to realize that there is excellent reporting that's going on right now. A lot of it is print. The problem is nobody reads anymore.
But you can, and the value also is, take what NBC says, but compare it against Fox. Compare the Washington Post against the Washington Times. Look at the New York Post and look at the New York Times. Read them all. Come to your own conclusion by gaining more facts, not fewer ones.
Amen. I think we can all agree with that.
I can agree with that. I got nothing to say to that.
I won all of them over. I got every one of them on my side.
It's us all to consider.
I'm not on your side, but I'll give a good
We're
point
on
when
the
I
side
hear
of
one.
facts. All of us at this table, we want facts.
That's right.
What kind of facts, Carrie? Alternative
All of
facts?
them.
Real facts.
Cool. Well, thank you guys both so much for being here.
Thanks for
Matt
having
Smith
us.
And Kevin McCullough. Come
That
back
was a
soon.
pleasure.
Sure.
Thanks. And next, we'd like to welcome John Fugelsang. He's a comedian and host of Page 6 Television. And I had the honor of going to the Page 6 TV launch. And Clay Aiken, I know, is friends with Mr. Fugelsang and could not be here, but he does send his regards. He said he's a big fan of you, John. So welcome.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Clay was recently on my SiriusXM show, and it was really a joy to have him. So I'm proud to come here when he's not here and drag your fine show down to my own base level. I wanted to jump in that last conversation. That was a great debate.
Oh, let's
Really, what do you have to
yeah.
say about it?
I think the media is as liberal as the corporations that own them.
Thank you. I
And,
actually wanted to...
I'm sorry, but James O'Keefe is not an honest person, and he's not about media bias. He's about his tribe winning, which truthfully is what most people are about, their tribes winning. But, you know, the media has one bias, and it's towards ratings, and it's towards profit. And if talking about universal health care and a living wage made Sean Hannity's ratings higher, he'd be talking about that every night. So I don't really buy this whole media bias angle. Whenever there's a war coming on, the media all cheers on the war and doesn't bring on the protesters because war is good for ratings. Donald Trump was great for CNN's ratings, and he still is. They're just taking a different angle on it now.
So
Well-
do you actually think that we can have a healthy media environment when what is it, 5 corporations own all the media companies?
No, I think we have to restore the fairness doctrine. And I think that all this strife and division amongst ourselves and all this misinformation when people can be so misinformed is a consequence of the destruction of the fairness doctrine. And I like having a liberal guy come out after we've heard conservative points, and I like having a conservative guy come out after we've heard liberal points. I don't really feel that anyone gets both sides of a story because most of us just consume the niche news that reinforces our own biases already.
But isn't the fairness doctrine kind of irrelevant in the age of digital media and the internet? Like, are you going to put a muzzle on, like Rob was saying, someone who has 6 million Instagram followers? Because
Not sure where you got the muzzle part from. I'm saying.
I'm just saying. I'm saying in terms of like the fairness doctrine is that people should have equal time, right? So, but with such a diffusion of channels, how do you monitor that? Who will be the big brother to enforce the fairness doctrine when everything is so splintered when it comes to the media?
Well, it was the FCC, and it could be again. I mean, I'm just saying niche news is a problem. So are mass shootings, but we've chosen as a country to do nothing about mass shootings. We've decided mass shootings, like childhood poverty, is something that we can live with, and we'll accept it and let it go on. And it's the same with niche media, where we have an increasingly fractured and uninformed populace where people just get the news that makes them feel good inside, and they don't have to face up to any unpleasant realities. And that's why so many people are just so misinformed about so much stuff. And again, you guys know they want us fighting. The people who own this country want us fighting each other all the time. That helps consolidate their own power if the puppet on the left and the puppet on the right are always knocking heads. But I kind of feel that our commonalities outweigh our differences. And as somebody who is who you know has done a lot of conservative and progressive programming, and somebody who does a pop culture TV show and a political radio show, I kind of feel like we're a big enough country for all of us to take in both sides of an issue.
Do you think? Okay, you brought up a lot of really great points. And for me, it's all music to my ears. Because I really do think that, I mean, I turn on CNN, I watch all of it, but I don't ever really feel like I am being informed in the most pressing issues of the day.
Of course not.
And I mean, I don't know if everybody's familiar with what's happening in Yemen, for example.
Yeah.
How many hours or how many minutes has the mainstream media dedicated to this when America is complicit in essentially starving nearly 7 million people and in consistently bombing a country, the most impoverished country in the Middle East, and helping Saudi Arabia do it and selling them arms? And we are complicit and nobody knows anything about it. But Trump's tweet will make the headlines.
Exactly, because we fight over headlines, we don't go any deeper. I mean, we all know that Kim Jong-un is a bad guy. None of us know that they hate us because we were dropping napalm on civilian targets during the Korean War and massacring civilians. We know Iran's run by bad guys because we don't really teach in school that Iran used to have a democracy, and our CIA overthrew their president in 1953 because he was a little too socialistic-y. We installed our dictator, and then he was overthrown by the crazy religious kooks that run the country now. It's like America is complicit in a lot of the problems America faces now, and I don't think we're going to be able to handle them honestly until we face honestly our role in causing these problems. It doesn't mean I'm anti-America, it means I'm pro-truth. And I'm sorry, James O'Keefe is not pro-truth. James O'Keefe did this scam on the Washington Post as a means of discrediting victims of child rape. That was what it was all about. So you wouldn't believe any of those other 9 women because this one woman they paid went in there to lie and cast a false story. So it's not about the search for truth. It's about getting a child molester into the Senate. Good morning. Good to see you all here.
I don't know what's in that cup, but I feel like it's the cup of truth.
Oh, golly. I mean, I'm trying.
He says whatever he thinks, and people like it. It's good to challenge everything. I agree. But I disagree that it's all about money and that the solution would be to have a centralized bureaucracy. Because when you look at
I don't think I said that.
media or state-run, like in Qatar, where the government is monitoring and subsidizing the media, like I just
I don't think that's what I said.
I don't trust the FCC. You said the FCC would be the arbiter of truth.
No, I said the FCC could restore the fairness doctrine. And, you know, that's just a means of getting people to hear a point of view they haven't heard before, like maybe let's blame the terrorists for Benghazi, not Hillary Clinton. I kind of feel like we have the means to bring these things back. We could if we wanted to. We know what works. We know what Eisenhower did that made a middle class thrive and rich people did really well too. We don't want to do that. We want to keep on doing this tax bill and fighting each other.
I love Dwight Eisenhower, so we can agree on that.
He was the last real Republican.
Amazing.
The last true Republican president was
I want
Dwight
to talk
Eisenhower.
about the hashtag Me Too campaign because I know you've got some interesting things to say about that. What's your take on all of this? Is this just the toe in the water? Are we going to see a lot more dominoes falling here?
It's a great question. You know, I do a lot of political stand-up, and I took this job hosting Page Six because I thought, we're all so divided. Let's do a lighthearted show where I'll make fun of celebrities, and then suddenly everything is sexual assault. And at a time when, you know, there really is no separation between pop culture and state, when there's arguably a Kardashian in the White House, we now have this horrible, wonderful story that's blending politics and pop culture. And it's all about women speaking up, and in some cases men, and not wanting to be victims, but wanting to be survivors. It is like the third great civil rights movement in a generation after LGBT equality and after all these altar boys that finally spoke up and got believed. I'm happy to see these people be called out for it. It is so easy to have a deviant, fun sexual life and not rape or prey on people or abuse women. When Harvey Weinstein went into rehab for sex addiction, I'm like, excuse me, even sex addicts understand what consent is. So,
Yeah, he's making himself the victim.
Yeah.
I'm a struggle. You need to have empathy.
and he said that. He said that. He actually said he wants to see himself as a martyr. I'm like, martyr? No, you're not Harvey Milk the activist. You're Harvey Weinstein the rapist, okay?
Well, and he's tried to blame the NRA. I'm like, you leave guns out of this.
He wasn't trying to blame.
Yeah, no, his little
I'm not going to
apology-
defend Harvey Weinstein, but he was not
apology
trying,
He was
to,
not
blame
trying to blame the NRA, no.
He said that he wanted to channel, I'm guessing, all of this sexual urge that he has onto something productive, which would be countering the NRA. Makes no sense. I have no idea who drafted.
Well, I mean, Harvey's going away. When you've
But,
got
yeah.
the LAPD, NYPD, and Scotland Yard trying to put cuffs on you, it's going to happen. But Kevin Spacey as well, you know, someone I've loved for years, but to come out and say, well, it was 31 years ago, I was drunk, and by the way, I'm gay, it's like, no. Drunk and gay is an excuse for doing Moulin Rouge on karaoke night, not pedophilia with 14-year-old boys. So, you know, while I'm glad to see this wave of recrimination and the great perv purge of '17, all these men can be replaced, right?
Oh, yeah.
They can all be replaced.
Exactly.
And as someone who had,
For sure.
and as someone who grew up,
Women with female directors. Let's get.
yeah, we have to elect more women. We have to elect more women. And as yeah, a woman director made the best movie of the year, Wonder Woman. But, you know, as someone who grew up having to rely on a sense of humor to be able to talk to girls, I deeply resent these guys who just, because it's not about lust, it's not about passion or horniness, it's always about power. And this is a corrosive element of male behavior that's always been there. We get to be witness to, you know, a culture saying no more. However, until it trickles down to the average American workplace, you know, food service is the area with the most sexual harassment of any job in the country. Waitresses, bartenders, what have you.
No, and that's something,
Until-
that's something that Clay talks about a lot. That it's one thing if you have a famous boss who could end up on the front page of the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal because of the accusation, versus you know, somewhere in Middle America, small town. The boss won't care because what's the out? The boss owns the town.
Until Zeke, the Burger King manager, is too scared of all these dominoes falling that he's not going to go grope the girl working the fry burner. Until that happens, it's just a celebrity story. It's another celebrity fall from grace. You know, we love putting these people up on pedestals, and we love tearing them down, right? The Anna Nicole Smith story. We love watching famous people screw up so we can feel superior to people that we looked up to for so many years as a culture. And these men deserve to be dragged through the mud for what they've done. It's so easy to get through your life without raping or groping or abusing or manipulating or blackmailing someone. And Harvey Weinstein was quid pro quo sexual harassment to a T. But until it happens in the average American workplace, it's still a celebrity story, I'm afraid.
That's what I was wondering. Imagine if what we're seeing is so prevalent among the most powerful and among people that are, you know, relative, that are successful and wealthy. To what extent, it's what you said, is that such a pervasive part of the everyday American experience for women everywhere?
Yeah.
And especially those that are more marginalized and, like Carrie said, that can't speak up. And that, you know, their boss, they need the job, so they're going to be.
Yeah, it's still a.
So to what extent is this really just an endemic cultural issue, and how do you even address that?
It's an endemic human issue. I mean, and look at these men. I mean, black and white, gay and straight, conservative and progressive, old and young. This is the Y chromosome. Testosterone rots the brain. We know this. However, most men don't do it. And I think most men are disgusted because most men learn somewhere along the line that you cannot control your urges or your libido, but you can control your behavior. And when we see that power and fame and money is not enough camouflage and insulation to protect these guys anymore, it's a good sign for our species. And so I hope we'll see a lot more. And when Kevin Spacey was fired, it made me so proud to live in a country where fictional presidents pay a price for sexual assault. America will not tolerate our make-believe presidents groping people. We have standards here.
Let's move on, because talking about controlling your libido, I understand your mom was a nun and your dad was a monk.
That's the best segue I've ever heard in my life.
In love.
Yes.
How did that happen? How did they meet? And how did they break their vows?
Oh dear.
To make new vows?
Well, my mom grew up in the South, and I'm half Southern, half Brooklyn, so I'm bilingual. Mom called us y'all, Dad called us rat bastards, and my mother, who is my hero, went into the convent right out of high school. They put her through nursing school, and she went up, was stationed in Holy Family Hospital in Brooklyn. My father had grown up in Flatbush, and he had become a Franciscan brother. He wore the robes and the rope belt and walked amongst the people like the lost Jedi of Flatbush. My dad was a patient of my mother's in Holy Family Hospital, fell madly in love, knew that he could never say anything because he had promised God he would never have these feelings for someone, or at least he would contain them. Then the convent they became friends. The convent sent my mother off to Africa to work first with lepers and then a jungle hospital in Malawi. My dad in Brooklyn became her pen pal and just wrote long letters every day about all that was going on in the States and Vietnam and the civil rights movement. And his letters became the newspaper for my mother's village. There were no TVs or radios. The Mother Superior would open the letters, read them aloud. My mom was the last to get her mail. Eventually, they sent my mother back. My father borrowed a car, drove down to Virginia, found the hospital. She was working an overnight shift and told her he was in love with her. And she threw him out of the hospital.
Wait, how long did this take?
This was a few years. I mean, he carried a torch for 10 years.
So this was a pen pal that was going on for a few years.
Years, yeah.
By virtue of the censoring nun, mother nun.
Well, it wasn't censoring. It just, you didn't have property. I mean, for nuns, that vow of poverty is a real thing. We all know a couple of priests with Rolexes and nice cars, but nuns really do it. I'd like to see a nun be the next pope, to be honest with you. And so my dad enraged her, but she said, come over and meet my family. And my grandmother was horrified. A Yankee from Brooklyn? I won't be able to understand a thing he says. And he showed up in his clerical collar, all Brooklyn charm, made all the ladies love him. And when he was done, he kissed my mom's sisters and he kissed my mother's mother. And he turned to my mother and politely shook her hand. And all the Southern ladies knew the Yankee in the collar was in love. She was sent back to Africa, but wasn't happy, finally came back. And my dad proposed and she said yes. And they tried to raise us to be progressive, free-thinking Catholics, which is why I do stand-up, because I can't afford the therapy I need. So, yeah, I grew up admiring Jesus the way anybody admires mom's first husband, but I've come to view Jesus the way I view Elvis. Love the guy. A lot of the fan clubs scare me. And I think
always say that.
One
Love
of our
Jesus, his followers, a little bit terrifying.
look at this budget. I mean, it's like followers of Jesus.
Yeah.
But we're all human. That's
Yes.
the human condition. So
That
if you expect otherwise, you're bound for disappointment because
I
the
agree.
human condition isn't
But-
highly
but
right.
That's
when
that's the difference between the conservative and the liberal is that you guys have such
We're realistic.
No, they have such a terrible, not a terrible, I would say, such a harsh view of human nature. That you see human nature as being such
There's
an
plenty of liberals who have
irredeemable
horrible,
thing.
plenty of liberals have the same problem.
Yes, but we believe in the possibility of evolving. And
think plenty of
reaching
conservatives
for
do too.
better, rather than being
Look at Donald Trump.
constrained by the human
Donald Trump's
reality.
evolved from being a liberal to being a
That
fascist,
is
right?
true, but see, Donald
Okay,
Trump
you know
doesn't
what,
have to
honey?
do
You're
with
gonna have to
liberal.
come back and defend that.
Well, I do want to just say one thing.
for that.
My whole thing is if you use Jesus to get ahead in political office and then you support a tax plan or a budget that is a rejection of everything Christ taught in the Sermon on the Mount, then I'm going to call you out for it. I don't claim to be a great Christian, but I know the Bible really well. And Jesus was not a homophobe. Jesus never said anything about abortion. The Bible's not against abortion. Jesus was very specific about how to treat those less fortunate than you. So I would love a government based on Christian
Let's face it,
values.
he was a
know what?
revolutionary socialist.
Yes, he was.
Okay.
Well, socialist.
First of all,
Acts of the Apostles is
I'm going
socialist.
to pull a flag here and say he said render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's.
That's right.
As in get religion out of the conversation.
No,
And
no,
I
no,
would take
no, no,
issue
no. I'm
with
sorry, but
your
that was.
characterization of the tax plan, because the tax plan will unleash prosperity for everyone.
I'm
from
sorry, but it
every
won't, and
income
no
bracket.
analyst has said that. That's not paid off. And when he said,
No.
and when Christ said, "Render unto Caesar," he did it in the context of saying, "Pay your taxes." That's what he was asked about, and he said, "Rend," because the Pharisees
you
were
know
trying
what?
to.
He
The
didn't
conservative
say
religious
anything
bosses of
about
his day
How
were
many
saying,
tax brackets there should be when he said that.
Conservative
He didn't
Jesus
say-
believes in stacking his money in the Cayman Islands.
Look, my whole thing is
great.
Eisenhower, the last Republican president to balance a budget with a surplus, the last one. Now, we could do what he did if we had the will to do it, because Eisenhower taxed the hell out of wealthy people. They were still wealthy, and the middle class and the rich thrived, and that was the golden age we all talk about. Unions were supported. We had massive infrastructure projects. That conservatism, that patriotism could work right now if we had the will for it. This bill will make the rich richer. It will make the poor poorer. It will make 13 million lose health care. It is the opposite of Jesus' teachings on the Sermon on the Mount and in the parable of the goats and sheep in Matthew 25. And Jesus never talked about abortion. The Bible is not against abortion, but that's how they get Christians to vote against Christ's teachings.
You're gonna have to come back.
I will.
because We are gonna disagree.
Let's
up
do
to
it.
The wazoo till the cows come home.
Let's do it.
Yes, let's do it.
You guys should come on my show, too.
Let's do it.
Definitely.
And in the meantime, we're gonna end on a lighter note because we just pretty much covered every heavy topic under the sun.
I know.
Religion,
we
I'm
wanna
going to be
politics,
banned from this
Jesus,
building when I
abortion.
leave
What
here.
else do- what
You
else
guys
do
are
you
way
want?
too nice to have me on.
America's Funniest Home Videos because John was a host. So let's end with that. And thank you so much for being here, John.
Can you believe that didn't work out? Thank you both so much.
Thanks. Let's
They're the Portuguese army, and they're looking for a few good choreographers. That's it, guys. No more gum chewing on these marches. Now, while the Greek army may know how to accessorize, imagine a whole platoon of these guys coming at you. Hi, are you here to attack the village or perform Swan Lake? Now, leadership is really the problem in the Australian army. This squad's original commander was killed tragically chasing a car. If they storm your beach,
Yeah.
So anyway,
I can't
how did
believe
that
you
happen?
did that to bring the sins of my youth. I was really young and I had a horrible drug problem and needed the money. No, they hired me to host that show for like half a season. It wound up lasting 3 times longer. I was the wrong kid for that show, but I had a really nice time and it was one of the best production teams I ever worked with. And Bergeron was a great host. I was glad that he got the gig when we left.
well, that you just went up like 20 cool points on my book. So I love
Doing
that.
funny home videos?
I love that show.
Wow, I was murdered on CSI once too. I'm in Coyote Ugly. I have all kinds of weird credits I could drop.
Are you really on Coyote Ugly?
Yes,
Were
I
you
am.
dancing on a
Oh,
bar?
I love
No,
that
no,
movie.
no, no. I was the evil club owner who tricked the pretty guy out of his comic book in the end.
Oh, very fitting.
Ah, interesting. That sounds fitting.
Well, there you, yeah, you know, I don't just come on and dominate a conversation talking about politics and religion, but it is a pleasure to be here because I do enjoy your show and I like what you do, and I think this is the future of media, and I like that you also create an atmosphere where people who disagree can get along and be friends and show how it's done. So, kudos to you guys and the whole team here.
Thank you, John.
Of
Definitely.
course.
Wow, we didn't pay him to say that.
No, you didn't even. You barely gave me the address to get here, so. But it is fun, and
we'd love to have you back at this address.
I'd love to
that
come
chair.
back. Yeah, we'll have to talk about this tax plan 2 years from now when we're Mad Max Fury Road and talk about how well it worked out. All I'm saying is doing exactly what Bush did might not work out as well as it worked out for Bush.
Well, to be continued.
Look forward to it.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Great to have you. Make sure to check him out and his show on SiriusXM and on Page 6 TV, John Fugelsang. So let's move on to our Bookster segment. Bookster is an online community of book lovers, and unfortunately Sarah Hill could not be here. She's our typical Bookster representative, but we do have an author here with us today, and she's a friend of the show, and she's a good friend of mine, Allison Pillinger Choi. She's the author of Bleeding Heart Conservatives. Welcome, Allison.
Thank you.
And we had you here last year before the election talking on some issues, and we didn't get to talk very much about your book. So let's get more into your book. Why did you write it, and what's happened since it's come out?
Why did I write it? It's been a long time coming for me personally. Since college, I would keep my political opinions to myself. That said, they were still forming. I am right of center, I am Republican, I am conservative. Feels good to say it now, but that wasn't always the case. And then my 10 plus years in New York City, but really could have been any major metropolitan city amongst a millennial peer group. It's not comfortable to talk about your political views or values if it's not in line with left of center ideals. And I just wanted to put pen to paper and outline my thoughts on the dozens of fiscal, social, and foreign policy issues and explain conservative opinions from a modest, compassionate, and concise perspective for an audience that I think misunderstands what it means to be conservative, and I wanted to set the record straight.
It's really interesting to talk to you because I went to NYU. And I was part of College Democrats, and we had college Republicans that probably had, I think, maybe less than 10 members, if I don't remember.
Sounds
But
right.
they were widely maligned, and even I at the time, as a 20-something-year-old, really, I was not very tolerant of any idea outside of my own. And I still feel like most of America, especially living in New York City, that's very much the case. Conservatives are shunned. It's a very liberal place. So what actually made you go from being very shy about your ideas to finally deciding to have the courage to speak out?
I think just growing up and maturing, being more comfortable in my own skin, and seeing the course of this pressure to suppress right of center views. So if like you said, on campus, when you see an environment where if you come out as right of center, you're accused of being homophobic and bigoted and racist and greedy, warmongering, the list goes on, only the provocative, just attention-hungry seeking weirdos might be willing to put themselves out there and speak. So, but that said, I am a big proponent of free speech. I don't cry and crawl up into fetal position if he starts speaking. It's fine. And I think that if more people were aware of the spectrum of right to left, left to right, then moderates will come out and feel comfortable.
And that's the issue. You said the word spectrum. I think that Bill Maher said something very interesting about this because he basically said Mitt Romney and John McCain were patriotic, good men. And they were people who loved their country. We disagreed with them, but what we ended up doing was describing them as Satan and as evil people. And so then, because the nice Boy Scout that Mitt Romney was, I love Mitt Romney, but he was portrayed as the great Satan. So then Trump comes along, and he is, embodying and using all the language that terrifies the left, whereas the people like Mitt Romney and John McCain, yeah, they're center-right, but they're more center-right instead of what you see some of the people who brought Trump up, who were very far-right. When there's no shades of gray, when there's no spectrum, when everyone's a racist, no one's a racist at that point, right?
Right. If you're not with us, you're against us. And so anything that's skewed from being Democrat, liberal, left wing, starting from even prior to George W. was a racist. Mitt Romney was misogynist. John McCain was a warmonger. Kudos to Bill Maher. They were Boy Scouts. And at some point, it wasn't even the extreme alt-right, right wing that brought up Trump. It was just, we tried everything. What else are we going to do to try to stem the tide of, 2 terms of Obama, which I personally, his policies are not my cup of tea, but I wished him the best. I was hoping that he could bring the country together and unite the 2 sides because circling back to my intro, I saw this happening since I was in college, where I wasn't allowed to speak out of my values, and that has unintended consequences. So I wished him the best, but after 2 terms of policies that were not bringing people together, that were not bringing prosperity to America, it just seemed like we just had to try something else. And and unfortunately, the Democrats didn't bring up a good enough candidate to beat what Trump was going to put forth, working with a Republican-controlled Congress that's creating the tax plans and putting back respect to law and order and things like that.
Yeah, that's where I actually, I agree with some of what you said, but particularly with, this happens to me a lot. Yeah, but I agree with some of what you said in regards to being able to disagree with someone and not demonize them, right? Because I feel like once you personalize something, then it becomes about emotions, it becomes about identity, and then you're no longer arguing about actually logical policy, for example. So and this is my question to you, to what extent do you feel like college campuses now, with the proliferation of safe spaces, right? With this idea of if you have a conservative coming on campus, you're going to have a protest and you don't even want to let them speak. Is that even, and this is where I agree with some liberals that are very much about not even giving a voice to anybody that disagrees with them. Do you feel like this trend is worse from when you were in university and you felt like you couldn't speak up?
Absolutely. And I know I'm not the only one. Jonathan Haidt, who is a self-described centrist, a professor at NYU, has started Heterodox Academy and trying to gain a critical mass of left of center and right of center professors, people in academia, to bring to light this issue that didn't just happen overnight. This has been a few decades in the making, but once something gets bigger, the momentum becomes faster, and it's gotten a lot worse now that I'm 10 years out of college and in a position to speak my mind without fearing risking my social life, peer pressure, my grades, frankly, if I don't write a paper to the liking of a left-leaning professor. And now I'm in a position to speak up respectfully in the name of free speech. And free speech does not mean just bringing in controversial characters. If you only bring in the controversial people, which again,
it becomes a caricature.
Yes, and then you get the stereotypes that we know very well.
Yes. Cool. Well, I love having you on the show, and thank you for being a voice of reason and sanity for us on the right.
My
So
pleasure.
we need more of you. Have like 20 kids, please.
All right, two down, 18 to go.
With a liberal, preferably. Yes.
I converted my husband.
To even it out.
Yes.
Did you convert your husband?
I did, and this is not any.
Convert, baby.
We converted my stepdad. My stepdad voted for Bush, and now he's a Bernie Sanders supporter.
Okay, well, some
There you go.
Bernie Sanders supporters converted to becoming Trump supporters.
Yes,
So
that did
that said,
happen.
it's fluid. This focus on policy, not politicians and personalities, which I think that we all need to come back to, because we all have starting from a good place with great goals. We just have different paths of getting there. So we'll see how it works out.
Amen.
Great. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Check out the book, Bleeding Heart Conservative, Allison Pillinger Choi, the author. Thanks so much. So thank you all for being here on this episode. It's a big day.
Yeah, we have to say happy. This is where I'm shocked Clay isn't here for this, so I'm happy that I replaced him for this seminal moment, because now it's time to say happy birthday to Bold Media. And yeah, this is a really exciting moment for you, Carrie. So it's all on you.
Well, and Clay's birthday is on November 30th also, so it's the same day, and it's funny because, and come on out here, team.
We get cupcakes.
Yes. Oh wow. And
wow.
a tiara.
Wait, do I get a tiara?
Oh, baby.
Oh, finally, the inner princess in me is finally being
diva.
Oh yeah, all the way.
Oh no, are we all crowded in here? Let's do that.
I should just wear this out.
No. So I just want to thank a lot of these wonderful interns who were here, the fall interns. It's their last day today, so I want to give them a big thank you for all your hard work, great team spirit, and very talented. So thank you guys. Thank you. And thank you all for joining us here on this ride. It's just been a crazy, wild ride. As anyone who started your own business or worked at a startup or have friends or family who have done a startup, it ain't
This
easy.
woman's amazing.
So
No, I have
it's
to
just
say.
not easy.
She gets up at really, really early times that I am asleep. And she is on top of everything. And she is just very determined, very committed. And kind of an example for a number of women that want to be their own boss, and she's making it happen. So congratulations to you.
Oh, thank you.
Of course, I really mean that. I truly mean that.
Well, I think we should make a quick wish here before, and then we're going to throw to a sizzle reel made by one of our wonderful interns. But what do you wish for in 2018?
I wish for sanity, and I'm gonna be total hippie liberal on this one.
Do it, girl. Own it.
I wish for love and world peace. Does that work? Like, I'm totally gonna be Miss Congeniality. Yes.
I wish for love and world peace too.
Well, there you go.
That?
It's happening. We've manifested it.
All right.
Wait.
Birthday ball. Woo! That's a wrap. Thanks so much. And take a look here at our best of for the last 2 years, and we will catch you here next week. Clay will be back. See you then.
Hey, good morning. Welcome everyone. Welcome to Bold TV. I'm Carrie Sheffield here with Clay Aiken. You guys like our new intro?
That was fast. You weren't even ready. You were too busy
I was
Snapchatting.
ready. It was Instagram video.
Or whatever it is. Good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining us.
I once had an author who had her book ghostwritten, and she didn't know what her favorite passage was.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
So you're the antithesis, and that's very fantastic.
It's harder to get an astrophysics book ghostwritten.
I knew I was going to be taken down and maligned. The toughest, most excruciating choice of my life.
There is no system of thought, religion, theology, philosophy, or science has access to truth. Only you, as awareness, have access to truth.
This is what really happens. It's not the sanitized magazine glossy cover of someone's success, but it's like the blood and guts of the sausage making, of turning something that's absolutely nothing into a real company.
If he passes this absolutely atrocious tax reform plan, then I will have to turn my F upside down again for him. But for now, because he has been somewhat incompetent, he has not quite failed as much as I thought he would.
So I'm going to give him a B.
Jesus Christ.
I know this show is bipartisan. I'm conservative, Trump supporter. It doesn't mean you have to think the same way as me. I always tell my fans that. It's like, but come out and be bold and be pro something.
Apparently, there was a model photo shoot where they all dressed up like me.
Did you?
With a lot of skin exposed. No, I didn't know anything about it.
Well, listen,
I wasn't there directing it.
What morning show do you watch now?
I watch all of them.
All of them?
I am having so much fun.
What's your favorite?
Nope. Nope.
You could have said you had an easy way to just get out of that question.
BOLD. Yes.
You look good, Clay, though. You look good.
Not this morning.
Good teeth. You got a great smile. You don't look as good as Carrie, but you're looking good.
Sit over here if you want to.
This is a problem because it's very possible I may end up taking this. And I don't need a fourth dog.
What do we do on a daily basis to manifest the dream that we have for ourselves, for our families, for our communities, for the world?
Leave the world a better place for you having been in it. And I think that shouldn't just be my goal. It should be everyone's goal. The people who come after you, you want them to know that you were part of a community of responsible shepherds of not only civilization, but the very planet itself.